Welcome to this webinar on risk-based safety certificates. The 20th century had several crowd-related disasters from the beginning through to the latter part of the century. It's important just to sort of recap some of the outcomes from those incidents and the reports that followed from them that started to identify who had responsibility for public safety. And if we look at the 1924 short report, following the Wembley 1923 Cup final, it was infamously known as the White Horse Final, the author identified that for the arrangements for the convenience of the public, the ground authority should be responsible. We would now call that the ground management or the venue management. The Wheatley report certainly identified that there was a duty by ground management and the clubs to see that their grounds were reasonably safe for spectators. So the language has moved on a little bit, and it's probably worth recognising that only 2 years later we had this Health and Safety at Work Act in 1974. So that's when we come to the Taylor reports following the tragedy at Hillsborough. We've got words that seem familiar to us in recognition of the duty of care and reasonableness that a club should have towards its spectators. And the safety certificates are the process by which the local authority can set a prescribed capacity. It's not just any capacity, it's a safe capacity. And importantly, that term safe capacity is referred to in the Guide to Safety at Sports Grounds, in other words, the Green Guide, when it identifies that the purpose of the Green Guide is for the author and the competent person to be able to safely calculate the safe capacity, whereas the certificate issued by the certifying authority prescribes that safe capacity. The other point of a safety certificate is it allows the local authority to set terms and conditions to ensure the reasonable safety of all persons. Originally, it was the safety of spectators, but more recently, the definition of safety identified in the Safety at Sports Grounds Act 1975 does cover all persons attending that event. So the certificate is issued by the authority. Its primary function is to set the safe capacity, and the local authority can set the terms and conditions to ensure that reasonable safety. There are probably two versions of a safety certificate. Previously, most safety certificates in the majority of the sports grounds in the United Kingdom were prescriptive. There was a detailed schedule of requirements set by the local authority. These set schedules were attached to the safety certificate and included such items as the levels of equipment that could and should be in a first aid room. So if a sports ground didn't have the 3-inch kidney disc, it was potentially committing an offence. But now we've moved away from that level of prescription to a more risk-based safety certificate. And if we take a look at the prescriptive style certificates, the holder of the certificate themselves had no responsibility for its preparation. They just merely had to comply with the terms and conditions within the certificate, albeit at periods of review, there was the possibility of the holder to have some discussion about the conditions. But in time, we've moved away from prescription to a case of risk-based management. Probably the first area of safety where we saw that was in the fire safety regulations, where we had the fire safety regulatory reform order and the requirement for the premises to develop a fire risk assessment and a fire safety plan. And those issues have been discussed in another webinar. So there has been some move towards risk-based management. And importantly here is that the safety certificate, that is a risk-based safety certificate, is still issued by the local authority. The terms and conditions are set by the local authority. But importantly, ground management has the responsibility and duty to develop a comprehensive set of plans based upon risk assessment, effective risk management. So those plans are completed and compiled to create an operations manual. And the operations manual itself should be presented to the local authority so that it can use the subject matter experts available to the local authority through the Safety Advisory Group process to comment upon all of the contents within that operations manual. It's no longer just a case of the holder complying with a set of prescriptive rules. The holder now develops the rules and risk assessments and safety management systems to their own needs. Taking a look now at the detail within a risk-based safety certificate, logically that it would identify the name of the ground. It should identify who is the holder, preferably a named individual, but it can be the body corporate. The number one function of a safety certificate, as discussed previously, was to define and set the safe capacity. That should be on the face of the safety certificate. The holder needs to prepare an operations manual, a very comprehensive set of plans, policies and procedures. The safety certificate should specify those activities for which the conditions of the certificate and the operations manual would apply. It also contains controls for the local authority. And there has been some discussion as to whether or not a risk-based safety certificate retains the authority within the council to impose conditions. There is no doubt about it that the risk-based safety certificate does not shift the authority from the council. The certifying authority will need to approve any changes to the operations manual. Now, in some cases, we've certainly seen examples where safety managers prefer a prescriptive style safety certificate. They feel that the prescription offered by the safety certificate issued by the local authority gives them a cloak of power and protection, whereas the operations manual can expose the individual and the clubs and the holder to having to produce documents that they may not be comfortable with and fully understand. But the local authority will retain control of the certificate. Importantly, the operations manual cannot be revised and reviewed unless the local authority has approved it. The other benefit of a risk-based safety certificate is it can equally be applied to a regulated stand. The holder needs to develop the safe capacity. It is not the responsibility of the local authority to determine the safe capacity. That has and always should be the responsibility of the holder. Once the holder has developed a set of capacity calculations, they should present those capacity calculations to the local authority for consideration. And it is the local authority that will agree the final safe capacity based upon the information supplied by the certificate holder. And the safe capacity is not just merely measuring exit widths, counting seats, looking at ingress and egress routes and flow rates, although they are very, very important. And once again, the SGSA has produced a seminar on this very subject. But the safe capacity is also a comprehensive discussion about the policies and procedures as to how that event and that venue is likely to be managed, and who best to determine how that is going to be achieved, but the holder, the venue operator, the ground management, the club. They are best suited to determine the appropriateness of event safety management plans as opposed to merely complying with a prescriptive set of documents and policies and schedules that may be outlined by the certifying authority. As I said earlier, the local authority retains its oversight as the holder is measured against their own statements and plans. So if a local authority turns up at an event and sees that the club or venue has not got in place issues that it said it would have in its operations manual, the local authority could take enforcement action against the club because the operations manual that is appended to the safety certificate is not being complied with. So importantly here, the holder will develop the plans and needs to ensure that they themselves are complying with their own plans. That internal quality assurance process is essential. The local authority will be measuring the performance of the club against their own procedures. Although I said previously that the operations manual does require prior approval before it can be changed, it is important to recognise that there are many circumstances that will require the venue and the club and the management to revise the safety management arrangements. The vectors that could cause that are many. They may just decide that they want to change the way they operate their space, but they cannot do that without initially seeking approval from the local authority through the safety advisory group process. So there are inbuilt checks and balances. Just because the finance officer or chief operating officer requests the safety officer to revise a risk assessment, it does not follow that that revised risk assessment and revised plan is actionable until and unless it has been approved by the local authority. The operations manual is not just a single document. It is a series of highly sophisticated policies, plans, procedures, and risk assessments, all of which come together to develop an operating procedure for that event, for that venue. And importantly, no two events at the same venue are identical. Yes, a rugby match may take place at the rugby ground. A cricket match will take place at the cricket. But each individual event and fixture is unique and therefore should be subject to the development of an event-specific risk assessment that will be contained within the event operational procedures, therefore within the event operations manual. All functional areas within the club and organisation should contribute towards it. And here is a number of the headings that could and should be considered within an operations manual, details of which can be found in the guidance documents produced by the Sports Ground Safety Authority. So when you take a look at those documents and policies, plans and procedures, no one individual within an organisation could and should be requested to put that together. For argument's sake, the ticketing strategy. With a good ticketing strategy, many of the issues that may be experienced that impact on crowd safety and crowd control can be managed out. So therefore, the safety management team and the ticketing and commercial department should work together to develop a ticketing strategy, not just for the season, but for the specific event. The stewarding plan, that should consider not just areas within the seating bowl, but also those hospitality areas. And the stewarding plan would link into the security plan. So the safety and security department and the hospitality department should be involved in that process. Training and exercising and recruitment of staff. We should expect to see the HR function of the club and ground management to be involved in that. The planned preventive maintenance and the tests and the annual inspections. The facilities management team would have responsibility for pulling that together. And communications, clearly that is a matter for pre-event and event day communications that will aid the arrival and dispersal of those spectators coming to the event. So you can see the comprehensive nature of the operations manual. The process is not easy, but it does take time and it is beneficial to the club and the ground management. Starting from scratch with a risk-based safety certificate as the end game from a prescriptive style safety certificate is probably going to take 12 months. Yes, many of the documents might exist, many of the plans may exist, but pulling it all together does take a bit of time, but the benefits are significant. The club own the safety management for the event. They have decided how they want to manage their venue and how they want to manage their event. The local authority will have confidence in the safety management system that the venue has a maturity in developing their own safety management systems, policies and procedures. And it gives a little flexibility to the venue and the certificate holder. With a risk-based safety certificate, there is the ability to develop a number of plans depending upon the type of event activity that is expected. So importantly now, we see the move towards a risk-based safety certificate as a benefit, with improved training, improved understanding, and a greater awareness of risk and risk management systems and procedures. Sports grounds should be now working towards a risk-based safety certificate with their certifying authority. And if you're looking for more guidance, the SGSA does produce guidance on safety certificates. You will find on our website a copy of the Home Office circulars. Continue to publish the Guide to Safety at Sports Grounds and our safety management guidance documents as well, all of which will help a venue to develop a risk-based safety certificate.